Welcome to the ETF's Learning Connects live session. Today, our focus is on the changing nature of work and ensuring everyone benefits. How is work changing? And in what way will it continue to change? How are digital developments impacting employment relationships? Who benefits? Can we reconcile labor flexibility, skills, social protection? Are there good practices we can learn from? To answer these questions, let's welcome our guests today. We have Tanja Jakobi, uh, Executive Director of the Public Policy Research Center, Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome, Tanja. We have Branka
Thank you.
Andjelkovic, Co-founder, Program Director of the Public Policy Research Center, Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome, Branka.
Thank you.
And we have Funda Ustek-Spilda, Senior Researcher and Project Manager, Fair Work, Oxford Internet Institute. Welcome, Funda. We also have today Iwona Ganko, Human Capital Development Expert at the European Training Foundation. Welcome, Iwona.
Hello, Denise. Hello, everyone.
And I'm your host today, Denise Lochran, the ETF Communication Officer. We are live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And a special welcome to you, our followers, our audience. Please engage in the conversation, post your questions. We are very happy to hear from you and let us know where you are from. Okay, so let's get started. I'll start with you, Iwona. Explain to us, how is work changing? What are the trends that have been identified in your work?
Thank you, Denise. I strongly believe that this conversation is very important. It's very important because different trends that are observed globally are affecting our ways of working, but also our ways of living in particular. So obviously, the first trend that we are looking at is globalization that is affecting all the countries, but currently even deglobalization that is influenced by geopolitical developments. And with those big trends, we see also strong shifts in technological advancements, digitalization, of course, internet technology, automation, robotics, and so popular recently, artificial intelligence. But we cannot forget about demographic shifts and climate change that are now very much influencing our lives. But with all those big trends, I would say the biggest one that is influencing really our way of working and learning and living is the digitalization, because it impacts practically everyone right now. And with this, we see a stronger flexibility of working relations, but also the ways how we work. With this, we also see that the new business models are appearing. People are working more remotely. Different elements of those shifts were also fostered by the pandemic. That before that, we did not even think about having such a discussion and meeting today, like today. And all this is really changing the way also how we work, but also the nature of work and the labor relationships are changing.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass to you, Tanja. What would you say are the benefits of those changes which Iwona has described, and also based on your experience in Serbia?
Yes, we actually learned these, say, positive examples when we first started to research platform economy, which was now 5 or 6 years ago. And basically, we found out this is a window of opportunity in many senses. and especially for young, well-educated workers coming from Serbia and our region, um, type of work which they were not able to find in Serbia because Serbian employers were not able to offer them such complex tasks which are close to their. That's why people really embraced platforms. Recently, also bilateral agreements with foreign employers, trying to use the knowledge they have and to improve this knowledge, I would say, all the time, because being competitive on the global market really asks every person to work on their skills every day.
Okay, thank you. And Branka, would you have something to add to what Tanja has just told us?
Maybe briefly, in our research that we repeat every year with both kind of workers, remote workers and on-location workers, it shows that they really value flexibility. That is the first thing they tell us. And secondly, it is being your own boss. That is how they describe their situation.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when we dig a little bit deeper, we see that this is in reality not the fact. Flexibility is really limited, and being your own boss is therefore even more limiting than anticipated by workers. But this is another story for later, later round of questions.
Okay, thank you. So, on the face of it, it seems perfect, but we hear now from Branka that there are some challenges. Now, before I turn to you, Funda, just to elaborate a little on those challenges, I'll say a brief hello to those who have joined us. We have Liliana from Albania, welcome. Ryan from Tunisia, hello, thanks for joining us. We have Christina from Kosovo, Urs from Lincoln, thank you. And please post your questions in the chat. So, Funda, tell us, what are the challenges to digitalization in the workplace?
Digitalization in the workplace is happening across so many levels. At Fair Work, we look at platformization of work and specifically digital labor platforms, but we are seeing digitalization of work processes, introduction of AI systems in recruitment, in management, in labor processing, across the whole sort of labor process. In terms of the challenges in platform work specifically, Branka kindly started the discussion already, and she mentioned that one of the things workers mention as a positive aspect of platform is being their own boss. During COVID at Fair Work, we have conducted a study on the labor conditions on the platforms during the COVID crisis, and one of the quotes from workers that struck me a lot at that point was they told us, just because you don't see your boss doesn't mean you don't have a boss. We actually have a paper titled with this quote. And this is really telling about the labor experience of workers in terms of the arrangement of the contract process, because workers are usually employed on a self-employment basis, on a sort of an independent contractor basis on the platforms. They usually lack the kind of work protections that we have in employment contracts. This means that they are left to their own sort of circumstances to face the risks of that arise from the work they do. This can be getting into an accident when delivering food, or it can be facing traumatic images if they're working on a content moderation platform online. So there can be several challenges depending on the specific type of work they do. And these range from very basic sort of, contractual challenges to immediate working conditions.
Okay, thank you, Funda. And does this refer to all countries across the globe, all workers, wherever they are, undertaking platform work, or is it in some places more than others?
It is some places more than others, and also it's some platforms more than others.
Yes.
This is why at Fair Work we are trying to differentiate between platforms that are trying to provide better working conditions to workers than those who don't.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so um, before moving on, I see we have quite a few guests with us and also a geographic spread. We have Tomlin from Slovenia, Rijeka from Croatia, Mahmoud from Egypt, Eunice from Botswana. So, welcome and thank you for joining us. So, we have a first question from Urs Hallenstein, how the work market will move in 2, 3, 5 years. So I'll ask this to you, Iwona, going back to your introduction. We asked you to identify how work is changing. Is that, what time frame is that? I mean, how much will it change in 2, 3, 5 years?
Of course, everything depends on geopolitical developments, but I believe that there are some strong trends that are already visible, and then they will still continue. One of the issues that we see very prominently is a high polarization of work. What does it mean? It means in the context of working conditions. So those that they already have good working conditions, they may tend to have even better with a higher pay. And then there are those that they have already difficulties in labor market transition or the jobs that are dedicated more to lower skills jobs are also increasing. So on one hand, we have polarization in terms of labor conditions, but also in terms of skills needed for the labor market. So we more and more need, for example, high and very top level, I would say, digital skills linked to, for example, development of the artificial intelligence and those really strong technical and technologically referred skills. But on the other hand, we need people with lower skills levels. And we still need to remember that not all the jobs, not all the work can be delivered online. According to the research of the Eurofound, actually only 30% of work can be delivered online. So I believe this polarization element will continue. Now it's very strongly visible. And I believe that the policies are here very important that really to ensure good working conditions for everyone and also social protection.
Thank you, Iwona. That's a very interesting statistic. Only 30% of work can be done online. But of course, digitalization then impacts the other 70% in any case. Is that right? Do you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. And what we see also in our research is that the digital skills are actually important in different types of jobs, even those that we in general terms say that they are low skilled. But in the end, digitalization is so spread that it's affecting at any moment different types of jobs, but also our lives. So we would need also digital skills at any moment of our lives because we are moving more and more into the digital world.
Okay, thank you. Branka, turning to you now. So we hear digital work, gig work, platform work, and I mean, I think the perception often is negative, that it's a precarious form of employment. It's usually taken up by those who can't find more stable work. What would you say to this, also based on your experience in Serbia and beyond?
I would say that despite all the efforts to depict this kind of work in positive colors, our research really shows that there are many challenges, and Funda already mentioned some, so I will just list them. First of all, in Serbia, and I think this is not the only country where we see this kind of pattern, this kind of work often really lacks the traditional employment protections and benefits that comes with full-time job. In Serbia, workers in digital platforms are typically classified as independent contractors rather than employees. So that means that they're not entitled to benefits such as health insurance, retirement benefits, and so on and so forth. And even more important, they're responsible for paying their own taxes, which was actually the cause of a strike of freelance remote workers several years ago in Serbia. Secondly, and I think also very, very important, as they are not considered workers, they are not guaranteed minimum income or so-called minimum wage, which is regulated by labor law. But labor law, as we know, only looks into workers and not into these kind of entities that cannot be classified yet. That means that this kind of work is really unpredictable and, in a way, subject to the fluctuating demands of the platform and the market. At this point of time in Serbia, for example, workers earn very decent amounts, but we saw in the past that this can change and that the demand for workers from Serbia really change over time. And last point, and I will stop there, is famous algorithmic management. So we know that workers actually do not have control over the terms and conditions of their work. That is one. And second is algorithms really run the business. And I will just end with a quote of one of the interviewees that we had a chance to talk with in the last round of the work that we carry out at this point of time. This worker says, "It really takes time for algorithm to start loving you." So workers understand that actually the way tasks are distributed depend on the algorithm and algorithmic management behind it.
Okay, thank you very much. And that's a very interesting quote. Funda, what can we do about this? Tell us about your research, what you found, what mechanisms are needed then to reconcile labor flexibility, social protection, skills?
Um, it's establishing minimum standards, as we have in established employment contracts. Even if the arrangement of the employment is different, even if it involves flexibility or workers to arrange their own time, um, this doesn't mean that the work can't have the minimum standards of fairness. So at Fair Work, what we do is we have developed 5 standards of fairness based on the decent work criteria and based on the years of research we have been doing on this topic in the digital workspace. And these principles are around fair pay, fair conditions, fair contracts, fair management, and fair representation. And it is really to establish basic minimums for understanding and evaluating the kind of work practices that we're seeing on the platforms. Um, this is, of course, not everything there is to do. There is more to be done in terms of the regulation of platform work, in terms of understanding what kind of operational models the platforms have, what kind of management styles, and what kind of algorithms are there that is facilitating and managing work processes, and then really building best practices around that.
Okay, thank you, Funda. I would just like to say that we will post in the chat the links to Fair Work. And just to learn a bit more about what you've said, Funda, with regards to the minimum standards, I mean, how do you encourage the uptake of these standards? Are there some examples you could share with us?
Sure. So the way we do it is that our research process involves speaking to workers, doing desk research about the platforms, but also speaking to platform managers.
Mhm.
And at the end of our research process, and we do it on an annual basis in all the countries where we operate. It's currently 38 countries,
Oh,
including
wow.
Serbia.
Brilliant. Okay.
Um, and at the end of our research process, we then give platforms a score, a fairness score out of 10.
Mhm.
So there are five fair work principles, and each principle has two thresholds, so that adds up to 10. So platforms are then displayed on a league table where we showcase their scores. But our research process is a really iterative one, and that's where the sort of the engagement with the platforms happens. It's not a sort of a unidirectional, you give us evidence kind of
Mhm.
process. It's rather, here are the things we identified when we were doing our research, and here are the things that you could do to improve the working conditions based on the fair work principles.
Mhm.
And this is a way to engage with them and to improve the working practices, working conditions that we see in on the platforms.
Okay, thank you. It sounds very interesting, and I look forward to digging more into the report. Um, as maybe a development in this conversation, but an aside at the same time, I would turn to Iwona. I mean, is there a risk, Iwona, since, okay, digitalization is everywhere and it touches on everything, but is there a risk that we're focusing too much on digital skills and at the detriment of other skills? What do you think?
Well, I would say that maybe it depends where it happens, but definitely not yet in the countries that we work with in the EU neighborhood. And actually, what we identify in our work is that we need more digital skills in order to boost economies. Also because, well, digital jobs are generally those that are better paid, but digitalization is almost everywhere. Another interesting point was actually found by OECD through their PIAC studies. It is that the digital skills are actually fostering other skills because then there are more opportunities to gain other skills. But indeed, there is a little bit of risk that we focus only on digital skills, while we already see that we need to look at a broader portfolio of skills. So while digital savviness is very important also in our daily life, we see that this flexibility to which we were referring before really brings other needs to navigate between new forms of work, new forms of learning, and new forms of living as well. And what we see is that communication skills, entrepreneurial skills, problem solving, career management are really very important, not only for the platform work, but also for any type of work and new types of work that are appearing as well. And one element that I also would like to refer to is the element of citizenship skills.
Mhm. Yes.
Why so? Because I already referred to big global trends and challenges that we are facing, and we really need responsible citizens that would then help solving global problems, like, for example, climate change, to which we all need to contribute.
Okay, thank you. And of course, then digital skills can open avenues, I would imagine, to learning more and developing more these citizenship skills.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Yvonne. I see we have a question in the chat from Marco Turk, and Marco has a question for Branka. And since we come from comparable labor markets, so I'm not sure where you're from, Marco, but I don't know, perhaps Branka knows. Um, Since we come from comparable labour markets with joint historical and socio-political backgrounds, I would like to tackle the question of employers' readiness for remote work, especially in the public sector. Flexibility expected from future employees comes in line with remote work. The flexibility is still far from the control employers in our region are traditionally keen on. Thank you. Branka, what are your thoughts on Marco's question?
I can only say I agree. Yes, we saw an increase in remote work during COVID times. Even labor code in Serbia, which has been rather old, from 2005, tackles this topic of remote and work from home. These are two different actually notions and definitions. Nevertheless, after COVID, we see that things kind of go back to the old routine, and employers are not so eager to keep their employees working from home. And I will limit my answer to this point now because it's a very complicated and very interesting topic. Nevertheless, we also know that reform of labor legislation is aiming to cover in more detail this kind of work. So this is going to be then, of course, reflected in employers' strategies in Serbia. But we don't know how long we are going to wait for this reform.
Okay, thank you, Branka. Would someone else like to make some comments to Marco's post? Okay. Well, turning to the point then about legislation and skill strategies, turning to you, Tanja, in the region, in the Western, well, in Serbia first and foremost, but if you have knowledge of other countries as well, I mean, how would you say that national strategies are integrating digitalization, platform work, and also responding to the needs for more flexibility?
Well, there are different avenues of work in that sense. The first one, and let's say with the broadest approach, is the strategy which is dealing with different digital skills. And this strategy is mostly related to citizen at all levels of education, meaning that the government wants them to become e-citizens, in a sense that even in the remote communities, they will be able to reach the government in a way which would be less cumbersome for them, without too many traveling to institutions. And for some time, they're doing that. And this usage of e-government is, of course, boomed through the COVID because most of the institutions were available only online. Second thing is Serbia's government goal to have as much ICT experts as they can, in a sense that they see that this industry is really growing in Serbia and that they want a lot of people to be part of that. And in that respect, they actually used some elements of coding, even from the lowest level of education, meaning of the not the first grader, but I think the fifth graders. And then they are also keen to introduce that even in gymnasiums because they think that actually everybody should have at least some coding experience on and knowledge. This is not always going very well, but it's going quite fine generally speaking. And I would say that they're mostly focused on ICT and maybe not that much on thinking of how other people in other parts of education should get digital skills. And when it comes to platform economy, even though we are in discussion with the government for a long time, telling that from the perspective of the tax issues and not from the perspective of enabling people to get faster into that market. On the other hand, for example, in Albania, which is from this perspective, um, let's say a country which is entering platform economy by leaps and bounds, their World Bank, actually with the support of the Albanian government, introduced courses for female workers to uh, enter that market. And what we see in our gig meter, which is our tool for measuring online platform work in the Southeast Europe, we see that Albanian workers are becoming more prominent in the in and that women are also more prominent among these workers. On the negative side, we should say that these workers are for now taking jobs which are of, let's say, lower complex, earning much.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. And you've raised a point which I'll deal with in the next question about, the societal implications. But just to follow up with something you mentioned, okay, you gave the example of women in Albania, but in Serbia, out of my own curiosity about how are older people engage those. I mean, I even see in my own family, the reluctance to go digital. And I was wondering if you have some examples to share. I know that Serbia is making a lot of progress generally. Are there some specific examples related to older people?
I'm
Sorry.
not aware of the specific. I'm not aware of the specific actions which are related to older people. But what we see is that the government is actually focusing again on younger and vulnerable people, meaning, for example, minorities, young people without even means to internet. So especially during COVID, they were like very much oriented to that, and also to their parents. So they're not as old, but still they're excluded from this whole situation. So this is the
Okay.
sort of progress they're making.
Yes, okay, thank you. It's a matter of outreach. And speaking of outreach, now if I look at our chat, we've had quite a few comments, and I think there's a point also agreeing with what you had said earlier, Iwona, about citizenship and climate, also that climate change awareness, the importance of digital skills for this. And we have a question now from Christina Zimaj. I'm not sure where you're from, Christina. It says, in addition to skills, which are the attitudes the employers and employees may need to adopt in these new trends of labor markets? Funda, would you like to take a first response to that?
Sure. I guess my initial point would be that just because work is happening, or work is happening through platforms that are increasingly more digitally mediated, doesn't mean that we need to let go of the established work rights that we have established in the last century. Um, and this relates to, for instance, the amount of connectivity expected from employees. Just because we can be connected 24/7 doesn't mean that we should be connected 24/7 for work purposes, or the expectation of being online or available for work. Related to this is what kind of risks are associated with doing the work online, because just because the work is happening online doesn't mean that it is devoid of any risks. So this sort of this includes data privacy, data protection, understanding of online safety, and how to keep not only data but also how to keep oneself safe online when working for sort of using digital platforms.
Mhm.
And in addition to this, of course, the effect of digital technologies on our lives, I think, needs to really be paid more attention to. This not only involves sort of the physical risks of being in front of the computer
Mhm.
for a really long time, but also the mental risks associated with it. And this might relate to being exposed to harmful content online, or depending on the kind of job one is doing through using digital platforms, the specific risks involved in that sector. And there can be a lot of examples from the medical industry, or from education as well, because for some, as Iwona mentioned, for some jobs, while the work can be performed online, doesn't mean that it is as effective to be performed online. So I think it is important to be also aware of the limits to what kind of jobs can be transferred online, and what aspects of that job. And in terms of the employees, I think flexibility was mentioned. I think flexibility is really important. And especially having lived through COVID, we all know of the importance of flexibility, being able to manage our own time, or our own schedule, depending on our own care commitments, on our own other needs that we might have. Um, and I think increasingly it is important that there is more awareness about the the work rights associated with online work.
Okay, thank you, Funda. Thank you for uh, that. And also, I like this point as well. Just because it can be done online, should it? So, Iwona, returning to the question I had just posed to Tanya, but how are countries, especially the countries which the ETF works with in the EU's neighbouring regions, so how are they responding and, and adopting skills strategies to deal with digitalization? Do you have some
That's
examples?
a very interesting point. Also, looking at our work, that actually we started to dig into several issues of new forms of work in 2020. So just before the pandemic. And there we did the first research, and we looked in general terms at the strategies for digitalization, employment strategies, skill strategies, education and training strategies. And the only element that we were seeing at that point, the most visible, I would say, was really the technology. So digital infrastructure to be developed. But then the pandemic came, and suddenly it became also obvious that it's very important, the access to digital means and the digital infrastructure, but not always it is enough. And since then, I can observe already, we've seen that many different countries are trying to foster digital frameworks in terms of skills development, education and training, obviously, in terms of employment and labor rights that would complement the implementation of digital strategies. But of course, this is all about strategic frameworks. Then policies need to go hand in hand to those strategic frameworks to implement them. And then when we look more into the ground, there are many challenges that the countries are facing. But we have very good examples. And of course, in the Western Balkans, we can see several shifts, very important. Also, when it comes to particularly young people and fostering their school to work transition, and countries are adapting in order to implement the so-called youth guarantee, for example. And the youth guarantee is helping into those transitions of young people from different perspectives, including employment and skills. Another elements we could already observe also in Eastern Partnership countries. And currently, for example, Armenia is working very intensively on new employment strategy that would also include the elements of the digitalization, but also just approved a very important education strategy that also looks into some details. So I believe that despite the fact that the pandemic had very strong negative impact, it also made us realize that we need to enhance our strategies, that they would then help situation of people in the countries.
Okay, thank you, Iwona. Turning to you now, Branka, I would like to. We've heard from Funda a minute ago this point of just because it can be done online, should it? So, a bit of a provocative question to you, but isn't it to the detriment of society, all this digital work? And is it sometimes not like an easy way to engage people in employment when perhaps governments, societies are failing to produce like actual work? What do you think? Actual work I intend, like an office, office settings, face-to-face settings.
Well, maybe this applies to some other places, but not to Serbia. So, in our case, I think that workers, freelancers that we see working on global platforms, were choosing this kind of work because they really couldn't find any similar type of work in Serbia, that is A, and B, they couldn't find any work, that is B. So, that would be my very short answer to this question. If or when we are discussing if some work could be done in traditional office setting instead of being done remotely or online, I absolutely agree with you. For example, and I'll give you our example. We, as researchers, we work online, our team, while we actually can work in the office. So we can still conduct face-to-face interviews. COVID is a long time, or it is behind us at this point of time, but we still continue to conduct interviews online. So yes, Funda is right. Absolutely, certain things could be done in traditional office setting or on location. But I think with technology change and with the changes that we encounter as society and large, simply we are going to move to remote or online work, even in cases when this is not necessary.
Okay, thank you. Here is an interesting question from Bostian, please excuse my pronunciation, from the Eastern Partnership, I believe. So, from the perspective of parents who want the very best for their children, it is difficult to prepare children for low level work. So, the question is, how do you see the role of parents in changing the nature of future work? It's a very good question, Bostian, I have to say, from my point of view. And Tanja, would you like to take that question?
Well, it's a question with, it's really a puzzling thing, I would say. I can imagine parental figures in a sense as voters who can change the way how they want the society to be driven in this change. When it comes to parents, I would say that it seems to me that parents are getting more involved in schooling, at least in Serbia, through these again digital means, in a sense that they can cover the education of their children much more than that it used to be, and
Mhm.
through these digital devices also, so they can track the how their children are doing,
Mhm.
and I think they may have more right or opportunity to place their concerns or their interest, that some subjects for which that are important for the future of their children should be, let's say, better taught, and where the can be improved. What we also see is that we have like very, very, very talented teachers who are really trying their best to use these digital devices to show children the education which they should have, like a broad sense, like a very nice something that is much better, and it's going far beyond books. So I think that this is also important, to introduce children to this world of digital, in a sense which will allow them to understand this new context and comfortable with.
Okay, thank you, Tanya. Iwona, would you like to add something to Bostian?
Well, indeed, I'm very happy to add because I find the question really very provocative and interesting. I would say that there are different perspectives that we could look at the question. First of all, what are the low-level jobs? Whether we see the job as a low level depends on, of course, sometimes we say from the skills perspective, low level skills. But then we looked at the education level that corresponds to this job. From this perspective, I would say that there are no low-level skills because if we want to refer, for example, to a hairdresser as a low-level skill, I would disagree absolutely because a hairdresser is a very high skilled profession, I would
Etc.
say. So this is just an example to really look at the jobs, at work from a different perspective. So it's not always about the educational level that corresponds to the skills that they need to be performed. But then, of course, we have the realities on the labor market, and not all the jobs are well paid. And here I believe that on one hand, parents can guide very well their children, but on the other hand, we really need to look at the developments of the labor market. And here, evidence can help very much on one hand, but also a professional career guidance. And career guidance already within the education and training system. So while indeed very often those are parents who are guiding children, I think that professional career guidance would also be helpful. And here is also another element, how to engage parents into professional career guidance so they both go hand in the hand.
Okay, thank you very much, Iwona. And I think there's a lot of agreement for the points that you made. We have C'est moi who has said, well said, Iwona. And we also have a comment from the Eurasia Foundation of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan has experience in this field. And I assume this is the point about engaging parents in the education system. Simwa also makes a point. The overdependence on remote work is not good for humans nor for the planet. If the work isn't necessary to be done online, then it shouldn't be. Okay, that echoes very much the point that Funda was making. But I will turn to Funda now as well. a broader point, but also encapsulating some of the things you said before and some of the points. Okay, we talked about parents, but we all know, of course, parents who are overengaged in their children's education. And this can also be to the detriment of some children, but also unfair perhaps to children whose parents are not engaged at all. So the question I have for you, Funda, is how can we make, these new forms of work, digitalization, fairer, more fair? And if you have some, guidance for us, please. We can't hear you, Funda.
Okay.
Yes.
I think we don't need to reinvent the wheel on this. As I mentioned, there are established conventions, international labor organizations conventions, there are established labor laws that are there to protect the workers and to protect them against the kinds of harms or risks that might arise from the work. And these harms and these risks, I don't think we need to understand them only sort of, in terms of physical. They can be physical harms, but also they can be in terms of not being able to be represented by an association, or not being able to have a voice in the workplace, or being able to raise issues, or being contractually limited to not being able to challenge the sort of the terms and the conditions that might be given to that might be assigned by the platform or the company or the organization. So with Fair Work, we are really trying to establish these basic minimums. We need to go beyond that. We are aware of this. But at least in the digital space, we just need to make sure that the standards don't fall below our established standards so much that we need to reinvent everything again. We have already come quite so far with the working conditions and worker rights. So I think we just need to sort of dial back and understand how digitalization is changing the way we work and the labor markets, and how and what are the gaps in our current labor laws, in our current regulation systems, and what kind of adaptations there needs to be done. There's already a lot of progress happening on this. You probably are all aware about there are so many sort of initiatives about regulating AI in the workplace, or ethics of AI in the workplace. And the same goes for platform work as well. There's the recent European directive on platform work. And there are several other initiatives across the world as well, in Chile, in Spain, in Italy. We just need to sort of keep this momentum, just so that, our future of work doesn't become laden with poor working conditions.
Okay, thank you, Funda. And I mean, you mentioned before, okay, there's standards about enhancing regulations, but are there specific activities that you undertake, like advocacy for employers, for governments, to embed these good practices or good standards? Is that something?
Absolutely. As long as we are given that kind of floor, we are happy to consult with governments, with policymakers in all the countries we operate, and with all the organizations that are interested in this. Our research really demonstrates the gaps in place and how the workers are falling through the cracks, because there's no protection that is offered to them in the workplace, and there's no protection offered to them by the governments. We have already seen this during the COVID crisis, when a lot of the platform workers could neither seek help from the platforms they were working for, or on, however you would like to call them, depending on whether or not they are working on a self-employment model. and they were also not seeking that they were not also able to receive help from the governments, so they were left in this vacuum. And this is the reason why we think it is really important to establish at least the very basic minimum standards, as the transformation of work is happening really rapidly, from one year to another to the next. Platforms might be changing their operational models. They might be trying new business versions, new business um, models. So we just need to make sure that
Okay.
our standards keep up.
Okay, thank you, Funda. Okay, we're coming to the end now, and I have a final question for Iwona, also following on from what Funda has just said. How can we monitor digital work, Iwona? Monitor it, evaluate it, adapt it to the strategies, the policies? Uh, can you tell us from your experience working in ETF partner countries?
As Funda just said, things are happening as we are speaking. And of course, all of us that we are around the table, we strongly believe that evidence should guide the policies. So ETF is working particularly with developing countries, our partner countries in the EU neighborhood.
Mhm.
And ETF looked already at developments in 12 countries, looking at the different shifts that those countries are experiencing. We covered for the moment 6 Eastern Partnership countries, and the recently published report on the work done in the Western Balkans. We are looking now also on at the Southern and Eastern Mediterranean, and we would like to also investigate in Central Asia to bring more evidence. But also there are bigger elements that are very important, and the European Union is very much committed to increase transparency of the digital work, and in particularly of platform work. And just mentioned by Funda, the proposal for the directive is looking at those specific elements, at the recognizing new forms of work, bringing more transparency, controlling, also artificial intelligence and this automated management, and also bring more evidence through, of course, reporting from the platforms, for example. So there are many things that are happening, and I believe that all those steps are also improving the transparency and bring more possibilities to monitor and evaluate digital work.
Okay. Thank you, Iwona. I think that's a very fitting conclusion for this insightful discussion, conversation. I would like to thank all the guests for joining me today for this discussion. Also, our audience, and hello to Ermal and Jinan. Thank you for joining us. I will leave it there. This discussion will remain on ETF's social media channels, and I would invite all of you to stay tuned to all our other discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.